Welcome, everybody. Welcome to United Policyholders Roadmap to Recovery meeting this evening. My name is Karen Remus, and I'll be facilitating for you tonight. I'm a 2003 Cedar Fire survivor from San Diego, California, and a long-term volunteer for United Policyholders. The organization was so helpful to me after I lost my own home in 2003 that I started volunteering for them when I got back to my rebuilt home in 2005. So I've literally walked the path that you're walking right now, and I'm so very sorry for your loss, having been there myself. So I hope tonight's presentation is useful for you and helps you at least on that journey of recovery just a little bit. Tonight we're going to be talking about navigating your insurance, your recovery, asserting your rights, and other sources of help. Again, we want to make sure we say thank you to tonight's partners here with United Policyholders, Community Legal Information Center, Chico State University, Professor Maitreya Badami. Maitreya, are you around? Right there. Thank you so much for everything, for making this possible. We have a couple of introductory slides, so it'll be okay. The California Department of Insurance, we are very, very fortunate to have a Deputy Insurance Commissioner for the State of California Department of Insurance, Joel Woucher, here with us this evening. So thank you, Joel, for making the time to join us. He'll be talking in just a little while. And also the Rural County Representatives of California. So thank you to our partners for tonight's presentation. About United Policyholders, for those of you who maybe this is your first meeting or you don't know a lot about UP is a nonprofit 501c3 charity. Our work is funded by donations and grants. Our work mostly gets done by, again, consumer-oriented professionals who volunteer their time, and also previous catastrophic loss survivors like myself who hop on a plane, come up, and facilitate a meeting. So it's my pleasure to be here with you, although I certainly wish it was under different circumstances. So again, not-for-profit, not for sale, and again, a 27-plus year track record of assisting consumers and those affected by natural disaster. So again, I'm going to probably say this at least 3 or 4 times tonight. We want to ask you to help us help you. One of the things that really helps us enable United Policyholders as an organization to be able to put pressure legislatively, working with the Department of Insurance to make things right is having statistical data on how things are going. And so we're asking you to participate in our claim status survey. There is the link. Again, all completed surveys enter to win a $25 gift card as a little added incentive. But again, it really does help the organization keep track what's going well for everybody, what's not going well. And then they use that information to push forward and use that with, again, the insurers, loop in the California Department of Insurance with the information we gather. So again, please take that if you can. Also, I want to let you know that tonight's PowerPoint is already on the UP website. So again, certainly you can take pictures as you deem fit, but do know that this PowerPoint has already been posted to our website. So again, if you want to just sit back and kind of just take it in and don't feel like you have to write everything down, although do so if you're so inclined, it is already posted up online, all right? The fine print, again, these workshops are intended for general education purposes only. It's no legal advice. We don't endorse or warrant any of the speakers or volunteers. Again, all of our speakers, myself, Joel, are volunteering our time here this evening as educators. For those of you who have not received it, again, the little yellow book is a great starting point for your insurance recovery. I remember when I was given the predecessor to this book at my own disaster recovery center, and I remember thinking, like, I don't exactly have time to read a book right now. And I just remember the person telling me, she goes, hey, listen, she goes, put it in your bag. She goes, use it as a reference tool. And it was a great piece of advice because that's exactly how I ended up using it. And then sometimes when I would get stuck, like I was waiting for an adjuster or a contractor to come to the property, I just kept that in my glove compartment, and I would break it out and just start slowly getting through it. And I know none of you has any real spare time. I remember it well. But again, it's a great reference tool to have. Again, the index in the back is great. So if your adjuster drops some lingo on you that you're not familiar with, or you're experiencing a certain problem, look in the index and then thumb over to that section. The nice thing about the little yellow book, the Disaster Recovery Handbook and Household Inventory Guide, is it is written in just plain speak. Do you know what I'm saying? It's very easy to understand, which is nice. Also, at the end of the book, there are just lists and lists of personal property items that you can use as a memory jogger when you're working on your own contents list. So that's another nice aspect of that book. So again, you can get that from United Policyholders free of charge. Thanks, Maitreya. Maitreya was just telling us, so again, 25 Main Street, they have them there for free. Community Legal Information Center. So those are free of charge, and you can get them locally right here in Chico at that location. Also, another great resource from United Policyholders is our Ask an Expert online forum. This is a great resource, a tool to put into your tool belt of recovery. So you go on, you can direct a question to a claims handling professional. You can actually direct a question to a previous catastrophic loss survivor like myself. And there's also a great library of previously asked questions and answers. So again, something comes up and you're like, hey, I just looked in the yellow book, maybe I didn't see this there. How can I get this question answered, or what's the source for that? Ask an Expert is phenomenal. All right, so again, it's a free resource through the United Policyholders website, so keep that in mind. 24/7 help on the web at the United Policyholders website. When I talk about the UP website, I tell people 2 words: treasure trove, okay? Treasure trove of free disaster recovery information. You're like, I need to write a letter to my, to my insurer about XYZ. We've got a ton of templates. You can go there and at least get a template to help get you started. There are tip sheets from professionals as well as previous catastrophic loss survivors like myself. We have a whole series on there from previous past disaster survivors. It's called Survivor Speak, on different topics. And those were literally all written by previous wildfire survivors, cat loss survivors. And it's a lot of really useful information. Blogs, templates, tip sheets, sample letters. Again, just always put that, again, another tool in that insurance recovery tool belt that you're wearing. So keep that in mind. Really a great treasure trove. You'll see up there in the upper right, you probably don't recognize because I have longer hair now, but those pictures right up there to the right, that's my husband and I on the left on the debris of our home, and then in front of our rebuilt home there to the right in 2005. Rules of the roadmap reminders, all right? There is no one-size-fits-all path on this. People may be encountering different challenges at different times in this process. So it's hard to have a one-size-fits-all. So again, it's good to, talk to other people, find out what's working for them. But again, unfortunately, it's not like some sort of just, oh, here's the template. Do you know what I'm saying? Because different issues arise in different claims. So keep that in mind. Take your time. I think that's a hard one. It's an easy one to say. I remember people telling me that. But I don't know about you guys. I was just like, can somebody just get me up some reasonable semblance of a house? Because I would just like to resume life, And, but typically people who rush through the process end up making mistakes that they later regret. So it's just one of those things. It takes time to calculate a total loss. It can be a lengthy process. So just try to take your time and make sure you are calculating the full extent of your losses rather than rushing to a settlement that you might later have some questions about. So just give yourself adequate time. Very importantly, you want to treat your insurance claim like a business negotiation, right? This is a business transaction. That sounds like a very great common sense. But I think it's sometimes hard to follow because it doesn't feel like a business transaction because this was your home. So it feels very personal. And so even though maybe like our brain tells us this, like, yes, everybody's telling me it's a business transaction, treat it that way, and that is excellent advice, and you should do that. Sometimes it can be hard because your heart is tied up in what's going on, right? Your home and the belongings that went down. But again, when it comes to interacting with your insurance company, you want to try to treat it like a business transaction, even if it doesn't always feel that way to you, all right? Your communication tone that you want to be utilizing with the insurance carrier, politely assertive. You're the good guy, right? But you're not a pushover, all right? Politely assertive, treating it just like a business transaction. It is never too late to start keeping a claim diary. Hopefully you're already doing this. If you're not, start now. I remember being in my own disaster recovery center down in San Diego after my home went down and getting this piece of advice from a disaster recovery worker. And first of all, I was like, what's a claim diary? And so they explained, like, hey, just get a spiral notebook. You know, when you have interactions with the insurance company, be it an adjuster, anybody else, just write down, you know, the date, the substance of what was said, you know, and just keep track. Keeping track helps you move that claim forward. At the time, I remember thinking, like, I am lucky if I even know what day it is when I wake up, so I don't even know about this. And I just remember the recovery worker told me, she said, she goes, do the best you can. And I will be candid that some of those things that were said ended up becoming very important later. So if you haven't started doing it, start now. And you just do the very best that you can, right? The date, who said it, and the substance of what was said or agreed to. And again, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be a spiral notebook. You can keep a note, you know, an electronic note in your smartphone, whatever works best for you. When you have requests for your insurance carrier, questions, things of that nature, definitely you want to put those requests clearly and in writing. Make a paper trail. Usually people who are laying a paper trail, those claims go more smoothly. Do you know what I'm saying? If they can see that you're keeping track of things in written fashion. Explain what you need, why you want it, when you need it, and why you're entitled to it. All right? But again, in a very politely assertive tone. You'd also want to make, if you haven't done it already, a working copy of your homeowner's insurance policy. What do I mean by a working copy? Well, you probably got a clean copy, I hope, and if not, request one from your insurance company of the homeowner's insurance policy you had in place at the time of the loss. Photocopy it. Photocopy it so that you can write questions on it, take notes in the margin, highlight it. Do you know what I'm saying? So that way you've got your clean copy and then your working copy. You know, insurance policies are not easy to understand, even for lawyers and judges, I might add. So again, you just do the best that you can, reading through it as you can. You don't read it all in one sitting. Some of you might have tried to do that and or have been taking it in parts. You do the best that you can, but make that working copy. It's a good strategy. I mentioned this a little earlier, so now elaborating a little bit more. A paper trail is really an important and essential strategy here when navigating these large loss insurance claims. So again, letters to your insurance company and or your adjuster should confirm, hey, you're cooperating. You're the good guy, right? You're the good guy, all right? Polite, but persistent. What you need and why? Ask what they need from you in order to resolve your claim, right? For example, if there's a holdup, what do they need from you to move things forward? All right? Point out specific things that they have or haven't done that might be holding up resolution of your claim if that's applicable to your claim. Politely remind them about your situation. You lost your home in a catastrophic wildfire. It has been life-altering. Those are all true statements, do you know what I'm saying? And it sometimes doesn't hurt to remind them what you've been through and what you, again, your situation is. Whenever communicating with your insurance company and asking them for something, maybe information, a question, or for documents, give them a specific time frame to comply, all right? Some commercially reasonable time. Please respond within 7 days of the date of this letter. Please respond within 10 days of the date of this letter. Just choose a very, business reasonable time to reply. The reason that this is so important is that then if they don't reply, then you can follow up. And if there continues to be a problem, you're laying the groundwork to get that resolved at a higher level, all right? So if you just leave it open-ended, when are they going to reply? We don't know, right? So at least give them a commercially reasonable time at the end of your letter, again, using that politely assertive tone. That helps you keep track of the claim and helps keep that claim moving forward, all right? So give them a specific time frame to reply and to comply, and then follow up again. It could be that you need to write another letter. Hi, this is a follow-up to my letter of May 1st, 2019, wherein I asked you to restate it again. This is now my second request. Thank you very much for replying within Give them another commercially reasonable time. Again, it's laying a paper trail that will allow you to resolve claim handling problems later should it become an issue. Do you know what I'm saying? If it escalates. Negotiation. So again, very important in these large loss claims. What are our best practices? Very important, again, keep it professional, especially as we're now hitting into kind of that 6-month framework thereabouts. These can be times when people are, I know I was, hitting various bumps in the road. That would be an understatement. I'm sure I know if that was an understatement for me, maybe for some of you as well. It can be easy to use communications as an opportunity to vent. That's a bad idea. Keep it professional. Keep in mind, just like even if you need to vent, then vent into a pillow, vent to a friend who's willing to be vented to. But when you're communicating with your insurance company, you keep it professional, you keep it polite. Like I said, you are the good guy, all right? So keep it professional, even if you don't feel that way on the inside. Be concise and be specific. Often it can be really helpful to put in bold or to bullet point the request that you have. It makes it easier for the adjuster to figure out, hey, you know, it's a page-long letter, what do they want from me? Do you know what I'm saying? So we're thinking in terms of communicating easily and clearly with the adjuster so they can figure out what you want. In general, you want to try to avoid long paragraphs. You just want to make the letter easy to read and understand on the receiving side. And again, in terms of keeping it businesslike, use good grammar and punctuation. You probably all have friends or family who have offered to assist you in any of a number of ways. Do you know somebody who's a good proofreader, right? And so if you're like, gosh, I mean, I'm sleep deprived, I'm exhausted, I'm emotionally spent, so maybe my grammar or my punctuation isn't the best right now. Hey, do I have a friend or a family member who's offered to assist? And maybe this is something I could have them help me with, is to proofread some of these communications, all right? You want to make sure that you promptly respond to reasonable requests. So if the insurance company has a reasonable request that they've given to you, you want to promptly respond, right? You want a prompt response from them, and then you want to make sure that you're being prompt as well. You want to confirm your willingness to cooperate, and if there's something that you can't do, explain why you can't do it, right? And so just offer that, and just again, this all goes back to, it's kind of, you know, polite, prompt, persistent, the 3 Ps. All right, if you think of that in terms of communication. And again, I mentioned this earlier, I'll restate it. You want to avoid venting frustrations and emotions. All right, so just be thoughtful in the use of language. What's your personal leverage when you're working to negotiate, right? So what's the personal leverage that we can work in there to try to bring them to the table or to resolve whatever dispute we have? Sudden tragedy has turned your life upside down. You're doing the best that you can with the many details that you are being faced with, all right? Are there any special circumstances? Are you a senior? You know, are you, like I said, commuting worker, disabled, ill, kids? All of these things contribute to your ability to move forward. So again, you can explain that maybe some of these things are causing you to take longer in some respects. This is your personal leverage. You lost a life's worth of possessions, and good help is extra hard to find right now, and prices are much higher, right? Because there's such a demand surge, right? So these are some of the facts that you can bring to bear, right? In terms of negotiating with the insurance company. Records are gone and can be painstaking to recreate, all right? So again, these are all personal leverage that you can, personal factors that you can leverage. Right now, you see Maitreya is handing out note cards. We're going to have a Q&A towards the end. And so if you, as we go through, or if you already know that you have a question, write it down on that note card. We'll be collecting those and then answering as many of those as we possibly can at the end of this presentation. All right, so you just, any questions that arise, you write it on the note card, and then a little bit later, we'll have those being collected, okay? What about legal and political leverage? So those are some factors, some personal factors that we can leverage. What about legal and political leverage? These are a couple of references, and again, you guys remember this PowerPoint has already been posted to the UP website, so it's up there. The Fair Claims Regulations, California Code of Regulations, Section 2695, Unfair Insurance Practices Act, Bad faith principles in California. So again, on the top, we've got regulations from the Department of Insurance. We've got Unfair Insurance Practices Act, that's the insurance code promulgated by our state legislature. And then judge-made law, bad faith principles in California case law. So again, there's a duty of good faith and fair dealing. So again, each of you, both the insurance company and on your side as well, be reasonable. They have a duty to settle fairly, pay undisputed amounts promptly. And again, the insurer's money interests are on a par with your own. Again, that continuing duty of good faith exists even should you end up in a lawsuit, even post-suit, that continues. What's other leverage? So these are some sources of legal and political leverage. Media exposure, right? I mean, if something's going on, sometimes if the media gets involved, Consumer Bob, do you guys have Consumer Bob up here in Chico? We got Consumer Bob down in San Diego, right? So some media exposure can put some pressure. Pending legislation, so again, it's not uncommon after disasters of this type for, again, trying to have some reformative legislation. You guys are actually the beneficiaries of some reformative legislation after the most recent wildfire. Some things that got improved upon that are making this journey a little bit easier. The UP survey. I mean, the information and the statistical information that we collect there, that's information that you can use in a variety of ways. United Policyholders has on its website statistical findings from previous wildfire losses. How many insurance companies waived the itemization requirement? Were there any, and which ones did, right? That could be useful information to have. All right, so again, there's a lot of different ways that you have legal and political leverage. In terms of the most common problems that we see, the big six, underinsurance, home inventory proof or trying to obtain a waiver, valuation disputes, lowball estimates and then trying to counteract those, buy versus rebuild, are you going to rebuild or purchase a replacement? Which coverage is available and when, and then delays and conflicting information, claims handling problems, things like rotating adjusters, failure to communicate, things of that nature, all right? So kind of in terms of the most common problems that we see people face, it kind of falls into this big six category. What are different avenues to resolve those types of disputes? On this chart you see, again, we've got that big six, and different strategic tools that you can use to try to resolve them. I'm going to go through each of those in just a second. But so you see, again, the big six, and kind of the most common ways. I'm not saying that there could be checks in other boxes, but the most common ways that people resolve those. All right, so which path to take? Let's start negotiating via a paper trail. And again, coverage issues. So again, say you're in a dispute with your insurer about the amount to pay for the reconstruction of your replacement home, right? So negotiating, hey, here we go, please provide an update on the dwelling portion of my claim. You know, on this date I submitted a contractor's estimate to you, etc. Here's a sample. This is just a good example of a template that we have on the website. I was actually chatting with somebody right before the meeting who was in virtually this very almost identical position where they had submitted the contractor's estimate, but they were, you know, the insurance company had not paid and they're kind of stuck waiting. So again, if you're in that position, how do you move it forward, right? Put your request in writing. Hey, on this date I provided that estimate to you. It showed that the cost is this. Please send payment for the replacement cost amount within 2 weeks. Continue. Again, as you know, I paid for extended replacement cost. And again, just lay it out via a paper trail. Give them a reasonable timeline for response. Tell them what you want. And if they're not going to give it to you, ask them why they're not going to give it to you. And ask them to put that in writing. All right? So moving forward, negotiating via a paper trail. And again, it's just a continuation of that letter. So again, what about claims issues, other claims issues? You want to document unreasonable delays, claim handling and reg law violations. So if you're like, hey, they're not returning my call, they're not responding, you want to make sure you're keeping that in a claims diary and documenting that, all right? And again, clearly ask them again via paper trail, explain the balance of the benefits owing and why you're entitled to them. You can document, if your problem is rotating adjusters, document that in writing and why it's a problem. There's new legislation. If you've got 3 adjusters in 6 months, then they're supposed to send a status report on your claim, which is a summary of the payments made, a summary of the claim. That's recent legislation. So again, negotiating via paper trail, refer to your claim diary, be as specific as you can, and if needed, if you're not able to resolve the issue with your adjuster, don't be afraid to go up the chain, all right? Up the chain. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. We've been unable to resolve this. I do need to take this to the next level. What is the name and contact information for your supervisor? You do it in a politely assertive fashion, right? And you go up the chain. So again, typically the higher you go, the greater you increase your chance of resolving that issue. Basically, because people further up are like, why in the world am I getting bothered with this, right? Let's get this all taken care of, right? So you do your best to resolve with whoever your point of contact is. If you feel that you have a solid point and it hasn't been able to be resolved by that point of contact, your adjuster or whoever you're in contact with, go up the chain to the next person. In terms of trying to resolve, particularly on the dwelling portion of the claim, try to meet in person with your adjuster and your contractor. Again, your contractor should be able to stand by his or her numbers, and try to have as much detail as you can on the subcontractors. Sometimes these kind of face-to-face meetings help you resolve problems, pricing differences, scope differences, so meeting face-to-face can be a useful strategy. And again, if your contractor can't or won't put in the time to prepare a detailed scope and estimate with subbids to compare against the insurer's estimate, consider hiring a professional who can do a scope of loss for you so that you can compare apples to apples on that scope of loss. So again, you can try with your contractor's information, his estimate, scope if they have one. If not, hiring somebody to do an independent scope of loss isn't a strategy that you can use, all right? You could also ask your insurance company to pay for it as a claim prep expense. Filing a complaint with the Department of Insurance boosts your leverage. So we talked about negotiation, right? So you doing it via the paper trail, using our personal and political and legal leverage. Also, what's other leverage? What are other tools in our tool belt? Using the California Department of Insurance. File a complaint. And again, you want to make sure if you do file a complaint, which they call an RFA, request for assistance, that you have a summary letter at the top of your file. What is that? Basically, it's where you try to summarize in very succinct fashion what the problems are and what are the basis for that, right? What's behind that, what's happened. So what are the problems that you're trying to resolve and that you want the California Department of Insurance to assist you with? All right, so a summary of what's gone on and what the problems are. Other strategies to resolve. So we talked about negotiation, using the Department of Insurance and their request for assistance process to try to bring bring your insurer to the table and hopefully resolve your whatever dispute you have. Mediation. Mediation is an informal, non-binding process for conducting settlement negotiations between you and your insurance company. It can be fast and inexpensive if your dispute is ripe for mediation, if it's ready to go, and you're prepared, most importantly, and empowered, but prepared to go in. What are some of the pros that people have reported about mediation? It's inexpensive. Typically, it's far less expensive than litigation. If you don't like the result, you can walk away. It's an efficient way of putting the problem behind you and moving forward. And it does educate both sides about the strengths and weaknesses of their positions. What can be some of the cons? These are some of the cons that people have reported. Insurance company might not be seriously interested in actually reaching resolution, but uses the mediation to gather evidence and to test the strength of your legal case. Mediator might inappropriately or unintentionally scare the policyholder to encourage a settlement. The mediator may unintentionally tell the insurance company things that you asked them not to tell. The insurance representative could potentially take advantage of your inexperience with the mediation process and legal concepts, particularly if you go to mediation without legal representation. Some people feel like they leave the mediation and it was a waste of time and money. So like all things, it works for some, right? And they're thrilled with it, like, oh, we got a great result and it wasn't that expensive and now we laid that to rest. Other people are like, oh, you know, so it's like all things. Works for some, not always for others. Other processes. Now we're putting another tool in our recovering tool belt if we're encountering challenges and our disputes or problems. Appraisal, all right? This is a process very unique to insurance, and it's different than a real estate appraisal. So it's really a term of art in this context. Most property insurance policies contain wording that allows disputes or the amount or the value of the loss to be resolved by a process called appraisal, right? So it's a specific resolution tool unique to insurance policies. Public adjusters will often use it to leverage and to settle a case. So it's kind of like a mini arbitration in a manner of speaking. So again, it can determine the scope and the severity of the loss, right? How much, you know, the numbers involved is usually what it's trying to resolve, right? So you're not going to do it to determine fault for underinsurance, but it's like, hey, we have dueling scopes of loss, right? Theirs says one thing, mine says another, and we can't reach agreement. That would be a very ripe issue for appraisal. This is a great chart. Again, this presentation is online at UP's website and also this handout. So again, basically, you've got the two sides with a dispute. Each side chooses an appraiser, and then that appraiser, they work together and choose an umpire, and that umpire is the disinterested third party, right? So again, that kind of just gives you an overview of what the insurance appraisal process looks like. Types of professional help available to you, right? So we've talked about different processes to resolve. What about different types of professional help to help get you through this? A licensed attorney, right? A licensed public adjuster. A licensed contractor, again, can help you negotiate, you know, give you the documentation you need to negotiate. You could also have somebody who's like a scope preparer. It could be a contractor, it could be a forensic architect, somebody of that nature to prepare a scope of loss. Fees range on all of these. So again, these are different types of professionals that can assist you on this journey. You might use one of them, you might use none of them. Do you know what I'm saying? But it's kind of nice to know what are the different professionals that could help me with these various issues I'm encountering right now. Litigation, right? So we've been talking about different tools, negotiation, mediation, using the California Department of Insurance, appraisal, litigation. Different types of litigation that we typically see in losses such as this, the big multi-plaintiff class action cases. These are very commonly the types of basis we see on those. There could be others, but historically, these have been the basis for those big multi-plaintiff class actions. And then also individual litigation. So instead of being with a big group of people suing, you're suing on your own. Typically, the basis for that would be something like an errors and omission claim versus the agent and or potentially the broker who sold you the insurance, depending on the facts of your case. Breach of contract, breach of that covenant of good faith and fair dealing. We talked about that just a few minutes ago on an earlier slide, that covenant of good faith and fair dealing that's inherent in all these contracts. Treat people, treat each other fairly, reasonably, promptly. Guidance available in the UP Claim Help Library. So again, this is just a very short list of the many online resources. I told you guys, treasure trove, I was not kidding. So that uphelp.org is just a great resource of information. This is just a few of the things that are available on there. Oh, and so I'm going to end my presentation. I'm hoping that this will give you some encouragement. We burned down in 2003, October 26, 2003, and this is our journey home. And so there we are 2 days afterwards. There we are. I'm sure you guys all have photos like this, like sorting through the debris. It's my 7-year-old daughter's bicycle. Just is there anything left? Really? No, there wasn't. Now, by late March 2004, not terribly far from where we are right now. Some of you might be to the stage, some of you might not be. We've hired a builder. Stonefield, thank you for rebuilding my house. But that was a good moment just to even have the builder hired. August 2004, we had the foundation poured. So, good moment. October 2004, the framing is underway. We used to call this, I'm from Scripps Ranch, for anybody who's familiar with San Diego. And we would say like, oh, we've got sticks in the air. And that meant like your framing was underway. We're like, oh, do you have sticks up? Yes, no. We were really happy when ours went up. January 2005, it's starting to look like a house and kind of resemble one. So now we're well over a year, looking more and more like a house by March 2005. And yay, July 17th, 2005, we moved back in. That's 21 months after the fire for us. In our experience, it's usually 18 to 24 months, sometimes obviously going into 3 years when you're in a very large scale. The fire that took my home, we had 321 losses in Scripps, but the fire itself took well over 2,000 homes. And I know, obviously, that's fractional compared to the size of this fire. So obviously, like 18 to 24 months, potentially even further beyond that when you have a disaster of this size. The good news is it does have an end. And I'm here to tell you, like, it's coming, you guys. So just hang on, all right? It gets better. I remember feeling for about 2 years there, I felt like my name was like Karen Rima's fire survivor. Like, I'd go to any gathering, they'd be like, her house burned down. I'd be like, I mean, there's other things about me, believe it or not. And then finally, we got back home, we recovered, and then finally I just became Karen Remus again, which was nice to not have that descriptor. But we learned a lot along the way, that is for sure. I'm going to leave you with this. When we got back to our rebuilt home, when my house burnt down, my son was 2, and I was a part of a big play group of moms. And when we moved back in, they were trying to decide on a gift for us, like a welcome back gift. And they got us a beautiful bench that still sits in my backyard. And I guess they took a poll. They were trying to decide what they wanted to put a saying on it. And there were all sorts of sayings, but they thought this saying best encapsulated what they had seen in my journey. So again, I find it still inspirational right now. So again, you guys, it's going to get better. You're doing it. Coming to meetings like this. I remember going to meetings like this ad nauseum, and I remember telling myself, if I even just get one nugget of useful information, it was worth it, right? So I hope that you get some tonight. I'm about to pass over to Joel Watcher. Right now, if any of you have questions and want to start raising your hands, if you've written questions on the note cards, our assistants, thank you, Maitreya, are going to start collecting those because we'll be going to our Q&A. And before I pass over to Joel, I'm just going to let you know the remaining format. So Joel's going to go over some slides. We're going to take Q&A for a while. And in the last portion of our meeting, you've seen that we put these signs up. And we will definitely be doing this tonight. These are for insurance interest group breakout sessions. One of the most important strategies that you can utilize is trying to network with others insured by the same insurance company, right? There is power in numbers, everybody. So in that last section of this evening, I'm going to encourage you guys all to break up by insurance company so you have that opportunity to network together, all right? And that's why we have these signs up and around the room. With that, I'm going to pass on to Joel Watcher. He's the Deputy Insurance Commissioner for the state of California. Thanks, Joel. So just pass Joel there.
Okay.
And speak right in.
Okay, thank you, Karen. One of the things I'd like to mention is very grateful to United Policyholders for holding these events. The department was up here a little while ago and had a couple-day one-on-one claim event to help policyholders with their paperwork. I hope some of you were able to attend that. But I feel fortunate to have gotten the opportunity to come up here several times myself to join United Policyholders. I think Karen did such a great job of walking you through pretty much every facet of what you need to focus on, as far as everything I'm aware of that you need to know. I'm just going to re-emphasize a couple things. But one of the main reasons I come up here is really just to put more emphasis on the fact of a reminder that the Department of Insurance is available to you. Hopefully, at the end of this whole thing you're going through, you'll remember United Policyholders and maybe think of them a little bit in terms of helping them out for being such a great help to you and coming up here so many times to help out. I do want to say the Department of Insurance, oops, we're jumping. Department of Insurance is there. We're open Monday through Friday. It is free. There's an 800 number. You can just call us, or you can go online. You can submit your claims materials through a portal online, or you could just talk to somebody if you want to do that. Generally, if you have a complicated claims issue, you're going to need to file some written documentation. But you can't just call and talk to somebody and get some ideas if you just want to get started. We're there for you. It's free. Please use us. That's what we're meant to do, is help you out. I have a few laws in these slides that I'm going to cite, but basically all of them are in that handout at the back of the room. So, when you're going through this whole process, there are two things that come into play in law here. One is the law, laws like these, giving you certain rights or dictating certain obligations to the insurance company. So that is one piece of how your claim is resolved. The other piece is your contract. So when you're working with your adjuster, and I'll reiterate what Karen said, right? You want to keep your communications concise, polite, direct, and not emotional, although we totally appreciate that people going through this process are stressed. And you might think, when you're communicating with the claims adjuster, don't you realize I lost my home? And that's, your perspective, but you gotta always realize in life, their perspective is, don't you realize I have 200 claims to handle? And I'm always doing that? And so, not that that excuses them being rude, not that they don't have an obligation to respond to you in a timely way, but you have to kind of try to get past whatever attitude they let slip into their responses and just stay steadfast in, being polite and requesting responses, giving them your requests in kind of those bite-sized pieces, which is one of the phrases I've heard Amy Bach use, right? Just like anyone else, keeping it simple makes it easier to move forward. So there's certain laws protecting you. So here's one, 36 months to get the replacement cost of your home. We know in this situation in particular, with this much damage, there is going to be a long process in the rebuild. And even then, you have ways to push that time further, but this is what's in statute. Another is the additional living expenses. If you look on our website, one of the first things we say about additional living expenses is to manage that money, right? There's a certain amount, and although the law has been modified to give you 36 months to continue collecting that if necessary, it didn't provide any additional limits than what was under a traditional policy anyway. So it really means you need to manage that money to make it last until your home is ready to move in. And even to extend to this point in time, you still have to prove to the insurer that you're doing what's necessary to move your claim forward, right? So they'll want to terminate your additional living expense if it looks like, well, you're not looking to rebuild. It doesn't seem like you're making a decision to buy elsewhere. I don't see anybody fixing up your home if you have a partial loss. So we're going to end your additional living expense on X date. So you need to be telling them, your reasons for why you aren't doing something immediately. Trying to get a contractor, trying to get someone out to, look at your home to do this or that, trying to get an estimate, trying to find a place to live or buy or whatever you're going to do. But you need to reiterate that you are moving forward in good faith yourself in order to be able to claim this benefit of additional time. So the other piece, and this may come into play for many of you, is your ability to rebuild or buy a new home at another location. California is one of the few states that does allow for that in law. It's not, most states don't have this. So if you deal with an out-of-state adjuster, they may not even be aware of this, even though they're obliged to be aware. And we did send notice out about this. So you can make this decision. And I think recent statute made it clear that what you get is the cost to rebuild the home you had at the location where the home became a total loss, right? So it has nothing to do with the value of the home that you're going to buy in terms of determining what your ability to receive your benefit from the insurer is based completely on the rebuild cost of the home you had in the configuration that it was in when it was a total loss, right? So, not the home you would like to build or not what the cost of the new property is. That's what's going to set the standard for what your benefit will be. So that's always, so you have to go through that process of getting a cost of what it would be to rebuild the home you had to collect on this benefit. But this benefit does include the extended replacement cost limits, if that's what it takes to rebuild the home you had, and it includes the building code upgrade costs to rebuild the home you had. And this is just a bit about, hopefully you won't need it, but this is the extension of your time to bring a lawsuit if you don't come to a resolution on your claim. Karen mentioned like business-like timeframes to respond. There are response times in the Fair Claims Settlement Practices regulations. So you see a couple of them there towards the bottom. An insurer has 15 days to respond to a claimant. So, some of this gets a little arbitrary as to what a response is, because they may say, yeah, gotcha, or understood, or something, and that's not a really complete response. But they have an obligation to be responding to your communications, and they have an obligation to accept or deny claims in a timely manner. So that includes any component of your claim. And so, let me just kind of move back to the start. This whole thing that you're going through in terms of the claims process comes down to the law and your contract. Those are meant to determine what you're going to receive as a benefit. The reality is there's a interpersonal communication piece that also tends to enter into the process, right? That's why Karen is mentioning to keep it calm and polite, because you're hoping to move this forward in a friendly way and get to your full benefits. Your contract has 4 or more buckets of benefits, right, in terms of your dwelling value and your contents and your additional living expenses and your other structures. Karen mentioned having that claims notebook. You want to make sure that you are keeping track of each one of those buckets separately. When you receive a payment for something, what bucket is that meant to be coming out of? Is this a payment for ALE? Is this for contents? Is this for the dwelling? Is it for debris removal? Where is that coming from? And you want to note that, what limit it is coming out of. Landscaping, where is that coming from? There are a lot of things that you might be having money come in and out. That's why you want to track it all in writing. And when there's a denial of any component of your request, you want to refer to the contract you want to refer the adjuster to the contract. Where in the contract is this not covered? Where is the component that says not covered? Or how are you coming to this conclusion? Because you always want to push everything back to where is it in the contract that this is written? Because that's what's being paid out of, right? Their promise to you is that contract. And when they say something's not covered, you want to see where is the exclusion for that in the contract? Or where is my obligation to do this, this, and this to get you to pay that in the contract? So that's really keeping it to the contract, sometimes kind of baselines or grounds the discussion in something that is neutral, right? Now, unfortunately, contracts, are open to some interpretation, but you want to get them to put that interpretation in writing and see if it's reasonable and any more reasonable than your interpretation of what that language says. So it's a complicated process. Nobody shows up to hear about insurance until they have a problem, because usually it's something we like to not think about ever. And, it is one of the problems we have, when we get to this situation. It's nothing people have studied. They don't even want to deal with it. But, dive in. It's a great thing that you have insurance. So good for you to have purchased insurance. And now, you're going through a process to draw the benefit of the contract you entered into. You just want it to be fair. It's not a competition to get the most you can from a company. It's about, a lot of it's about showing you're being reasonable to them, that you're not trying to get some kind of windfall, which is, from their perspective, might be their suspicion. But in dealing calmly and logically, you can allay that out of the process. So again, you have a lot of information from United Policyholders. You have the Department of Insurance, where you can contact a person any day, next week or tomorrow. Give us a call. Start the process if you want assistance. And, just get a little bit of advice. And I think what we're going to do now is take questions. Okay.
All right, so you hold that. I'm going to take
I don't
this.
think we need them.
And again, before we start our Q&A, more questions. Maitreya, do you mind grabbing those real quick as I move through this? Thank you so much, golly. So again, we just want to have a quick reminder, again, asking you if you can to take the claim status survey. Oops, sorry, thank you, Joel. Just a quick reminder, asking you to take the claim status survey at the UP website. Again, definitely please help us help you. And again, getting that sort of statistical information is very helpful and will give you potentially additional leverage you need to help move some of these claims and issues forward. All right, oops, hello. Well, if it's not one thing, it's another. There we go. Let's see if we got it back. Just one second, you guys. Was that off the computer? Good news is we didn't really have much on those slides anyways. Now, there we go. We're back. All right. So again, we've had a number of questions come in. I'm going to ask the question. Joel, I'm going to hand to you. If I have anything to add, I will. And nope, I'm going to read them right here. First question. Here we go. First question, could Joel spell his last name? Joel?
Nope.
It's there. That's you. That was an easy one.
Turns out I can't, but luckily somebody wrote it down for me. So it's right up there on the board, Laucher. All right, thank you. Good night.
Here we go. All right. Oops, that's next. All right. Our insurer, State Farm, wants us to take 75% of our contents coverage. Is there any way we can get 100% of our money without having to list everything we owned?
Okay. So the Department of Insurance sent out a request to all insurers asking them to waive up to 100% of the inventory process. A couple of insurers agreed to do that. Other insurers agreed to waive 75% or 80, 70, many are at 50, and a few didn't agree to waive any of the inventory. And I know we would, again, everybody wants to collect their full amount, and you may be totally entitled to that. I would say for State Farm, I believe their contents limit is 75% of the dwelling A amount of your dwelling coverage. And so that's a pretty high limit for their contents compared to some insurers are at 50%. So they felt, in fairness, that giving you 75% of 75% was better than some insurers or equivalent who were giving you 100% but only gave you 50% contents. But generally, these companies have decided to stay where they are at whatever limit they agreed to. What you want to do, I guess, to avoid doing the full inventory if that's possible, right? So you have to start at $1 to get more than the 75% they gave you, is that you would want to prove how quickly you can get to something approaching what they've already given you and say, you know, these, maybe you can tell them, well, I haven't even gotten to these things that I owned, right? But they're not going to just waive it, I would say, for almost anyone, unless you might have another problem that with State Farm. Maybe they'll kind of balance those issues. For example, if you have an underinsurance problem and you're going to, you know, kind of agree to settle at what they're going to give you on the dwelling if they add in some of the contents, that's where Karen's reference to a negotiation comes into play. But we can't order a company to waive the inventory process.
Here, and I'll add some additional thoughts on that. So is there any way we can get 100% of our money without having to list everything we owned? Joel mentioned earlier, and it is kind of a bit like a unicorn, so I don't want to drop this term, just be like, oh, ask for an inventory waiver as though that easily happens or readily happens. Again, sometimes we reference it, like I said, kind of like a unicorn sighting. But policyholders, some policyholders, you're looking at one of them, have been able to successfully negotiate an inventory waiver on a variety of reasons. Ways I've seen past fire survivors, and again, I'm not saying a lot of them, but if you know, your facts might dictate this, and it might or might not be successful. I've seen previous fire survivors who had some bad claims handling that might give rise to a bad faith lawsuit, or potentially, and they were able to leverage those facts into bringing the insurer to the table to waive the itemization requirement. So again, I think that the insurer felt that things that had happened in the claim, and it was because the insurer had kept a claim diary, had kept track of delays, things that they thought were not right, or where they felt that the adjuster had acted unreasonably, but they were able to document that and bring the insurer to the table on waiving the inventory requirement. Other things I've seen, medical need. So I've definitely seen a few fire survivors with documented medical need that having to document and go through that inventory requirement would exacerbate or otherwise harm them. Do you know what I'm saying? Exacerbate an existing medical condition, prove personally harmful, but had that documented, and that was most commonly I've seen documented with a note from their doctor. I'm not saying that that would work for everybody, and I'm not saying that all insurance companies would do that, but if you're looking for some, like, how have other wildfire survivors, do you know what I'm saying? What have been some of the personal or other leverage that they've used to get an inventory waiver, you know, either in total or above the 75% payout or whatever payout your insurance company has had. This isn't an inventory waiver strategy, but keep in mind if you have a percentage payout, 50, 75% as this question had, and you're like, listen, I don't have the emotional bandwidth to go through this. I mean, I don't know about you guys. But when I first started trying to work on that list, I was like, I am trying to forget everything that burned down. I am not trying to remember it in painstaking detail, right? You know, another strategy that you could potentially use is hiring professional help. Now, of course, there are home inventory specialists who will sit down with you and take at least hopefully a decent amount of the sting out of it. Do you know what I'm saying? By working on it with you, doing the documentation, obviously they charge. And that could be hourly or it could potentially be a percentage. But depending on what that percentage that you might be leaving on the table, you might be like, hey, that's a great strategy. I know I don't want to just do it personally myself, but I also don't want to leave that money on the table. Maybe hiring professional help to try to get that differential is worth it. So again, those are, again, inventory waiver, a little bit like a unicorn sighting. Look on our website. We do have, I do believe there's a survivor speaks on that. Don't quote me, but I think there is. But, you know, is there any personal leverage or facts in your case that you think that you could leverage to bring the insurer to the table? And so it's a good deal for everybody. It makes sense. And then hiring professional help. Joel?
Yeah, just one addition to that. We did have a bill last year to try to get insurers to waive the inventory as part of this process, and that bill didn't make it through the process. But I would say this, in insurers' defense in fighting that bill, many mention that we will send someone in to help you go through and do an inventory. Now, that may not seem like such a great, wonderful offer to you, but I do know some companies have sent in specialists in helping with the inventory and sat down with the homeowner and helped them build most of their way through the process and get to their limits. So you might ask the insurer, well, are you willing to help me? Is your adjuster willing to help me and come in? And if you're very certain, you know, that you have that level of loss, then it might behoove you to have them honor their commitment that they make public, that they will come help you with your inventory.
Nice.
For free.
Can you please clarify extended replacement policy in regards to buying a replacement home?
Yeah, so that just refers back to something I mentioned a little bit ago, which is when they figure out the cost to rebuild the home you had at the location it was in, typically you're going to get a contractor's estimate, or the company will come up with its estimate, however it's calculated. And whatever that number is, it's not contained by what the limits of your policy are. It's contained by the limit it's contained by whatever your total coverage is. So let's say you had a $100,000 limit, and there's an estimate done, and it turns out that it would cost $150,000 to rebuild your home. So, well, if you had 50% extended replacement cost, that would mean your $100,000 limit, you'd have an extra $50,000. If you wanted to buy elsewhere, and it would cost $150,000 to rebuild the home you had, then you could use that whole $150,000 to buy a home somewhere else, right? If there's a building code upgrade component, so let's say that adds another $20,000 to the cost to rebuild, and you had building code upgrade coverage. So now it would have cost $170,000 to rebuild your home, and you have that much available to you in coverage because you had the extended replacement cost, because you had the building code upgrade, then you have that full $170,000 to spend on the dwelling structure at another location. Is that clear, or it sounds like there's follow-up?
Okay. Okay, so that was a follow-up question that was coming up on a separate note card. If people have asked about an insurance company saying that they want to take a land value deduction, do you want to respond to that? I can take it too.
Yeah, that is a tough one, and I would say the general rule or the general approach has been that it does not include the land value. Now, that could be disputed, and I tell you, probably when it most frequently gets resolved is through some other consideration in the claim. For example, this'll, if you give me that land value, I'm off of ALE then, and my claim's resolved and everything's over with, so it might be worth it to the insurer, or there's a dispute over the construction value of the home, and this kind of resolves it if they just include the land value. But my understanding is the current legal decisions tend to sway that there isn't coverage for the land. So if you have a $250,000 replacement cost on your home, and you go and buy a $250,000 home at another location, which includes the land value, most insurers will deduct it. Some do not. So it's not a fixed thing.
It's still an open question. I think to our knowledge, I don't believe that has gone to a court yet. And so it's still an open question. UP has a tip sheet on this on the website. What are some arguments you can make to push back against that type of attempt to take a deduction for land value when you're using your extended replacement cost code upgrade coverage, basically your homeowner's insurance coverage? First of all, Joel mentioned this earlier, and we had it on a slide earlier. Where does it say that in my policy? Where does it say that in my policy that you can take a deduction for land value, right? Policy defines the rights and remedies between the two parties. What in that policy gives you the right to do that? So that's one strategy, one argument you can make to push back. Other strategies, hey, if I'm buying this home, this replacement home, it stands to reason that, even though it costs the same, maybe I've elected to take a home that would be lesser in value. So why should you be the beneficiary of that? What makes you the beneficiary of that decision over me as the insured, right? So again, these are a couple of different arguments that you can raise. Again, there's a tip sheet on this on the UP website. So for those of you who are looking at the rebuild versus buy and are encountering this argument about a deduction for land value, I think to our knowledge currently, but again, read the tip sheet, is that is still somewhat of an open question, but those are at least a few arguments that, again, why should they be entitled to use their number, right? So a couple of arguments you can use to push back.
Right, that second one sometimes referred to as a windfall to the insurer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here is another question. Is the use of email okay as a primary source of communication? If so, should one CC more than just the adjuster?
Well, I think the department sees a lot of the interaction and communication between consumer or policyholder and insurer is through email. So typically, if the insurer is willing to go that way, I think it could be a preferred method because you're able to keep strings of email by date and time and show the whole story in one string potentially. So I would encourage email. I don't know if all our staff do that, but it just makes it easier, to keep track of what was covered, and you can refer the adjuster back to their own comments in the previous email, and it's right there in the string.
Yeah, and I would just say, again, one of our earlier strategies was confirm in writing, right? Lay a paper trail. Email is fine. A lot of people find it easy to just create a folder within their email account and then just put all of that communication in one folder for ready access, should you need it, all right? Here we go, next question, Joel. Is a scope of loss required in order to collect on code upgrade endorsement for a replacement home? And then it goes on to say, my insurance company refuses to disclose the process in order to collect and are stating it only applies to a replacement home if the home requires code upgrades. advice on specific arguments to negotiate. So is a scope of loss required in order to collect on code upgrade endorsement for replacement home?
Well, I don't know that I know the specific answer for this. I mean, generally the insurer is going to come up with the cost to rebuild the home you had and may not include an upgrade cost in there. And it may be, I believe, up to you to show there is a code upgrade cost. I wouldn't say, because I don't know the specific answer, I don't know that they have an obligation to give you the code upgrade costs.
I would say if they're not going to give it to you, ask them why they're not going to give it to you. And then if they say that it needs to be documented, then confirm in writing, do I need to get a scope of loss detailing that for you to pay this under my policy, and will you cover that cost? If you're requiring that to pay that coverage, will you cover the cost of that, as a claims expense? Do you know what I'm saying? If you refuse to pay that without some sort of independent scope of loss prepared, what else can you do? Try to get somebody to document the cost of that and ask them if they will cover the cost of that as a claims expense. If they say no, that seems like a perfect example of something that you could file a request for assistance on,
right,
and ask the Department of Insurance to assist you with that.
Yeah, I would add that based on the age of your home, it's going to be fairly obvious that you are going to have some building code upgrade costs. For example, if you were built in a pre-sprinklered requirement era, there will be a sprinkler requirement. And so insurers are aware of that, and so should be acknowledging that cost. Let me just read it while you read.
Okay, thank you. If your insurance company has depreciated all personal property 50% and you feel that it is unjust, how do you negotiate? They claim they overpaid me, but won't ask for it back. So they claim they overpaid me, but won't ask for it back. So again, if they have depreciated all personal property 50% and feel that it's unjust, how do you negotiate?
Yeah, well, it's very kind of them not to request how much they overpaid you, my snarky answer, but insurers aren't allowed to just apply a percentage against all of your property, your personal property or contents. They're obligated to take your list with the information you've given them as to the condition and age of the particular piece of property and apply a depreciation amount based on each individual piece, based on its condition and value. Not say, well, 5 years, I'm going to say it's all 5 years old and depreciate at 50%. That's just a shortcut the insurer has taken, and it's not one that's legal.
Yeah, and I'd again like to redirect you back to the UP website, which I seem to do a lot of just because there's a lot of great information. There's an excellent tip sheet on the website about pushing back against excessive depreciation. Building on what Joel was just saying, some of the primary tips there are, again, argue about the condition of the items. It's not just age. You could have something that's 25 years old, but maybe it's a special occasion item. You've worn it twice. So condition counts, not just age. And also to add on that, nobody knows the condition of your items better than you. All right? So nobody knows the condition of your items, what state they were in. So again, if they've overly depreciated, again, we typically refer to when they try to depreciate at the same rate across the board as blanket depreciation. And again, that would be another item that somebody, if they can't resolve that, could file a request for assistance from the department for. Right. Correct, Joel? So again, you could also ask them, hey, what depreciation schedule did you use? How did you depreciate my items, right? So you can push back individually, arguing for lower depreciation on items that you know were in good condition, right? Special occasion items. If you're talking about the structure, the carpet in your spare room didn't get used as much as the carpet in your living room, right? Everybody's on the carpet in the living room. Maybe people only go into the spare room once in a blue moon. So again, there's ways to push back on depreciation both on the contents as well as the structure by arguing condition. Remaining life expectancy is another argument that you can make. What's the remaining life expectancy of that item? Some things shouldn't be depreciated at all. Some things actually appreciate in value, such as antiques, right? So again, to apply blanket depreciation is patently unfair for that reason as well. But again, if they won't come back on that position, that's a good opportunity for the Department of Insurance to try to assist you. But those are some strategies to push back. Argue on the condition, remaining life expectancy, and asking them what depreciation schedule they used to apply that depreciation.
Yeah, I'll just add one that United Policyholders often uses, is that you buy two couches, identical couches for the same price on the same date, and one you stick in your family room where you eat the popcorn and hot dogs and everything while you watch television every night, and your dog's on the couch next to you while you do it. And the other one, the identical couch, is in your living room, which is off limits to everybody unless we have guests, right? They are going to have two different values 5 years later, right? So here, identical items, same purchase date, same price, different values. And that's what an insurer kind of has to go through.
Yeah. All right, so you hold that. What does loss of use cover? And then it says something about underinsurance, garage not covered. But let me take that first one at the beginning. What does loss of use cover?
Okay, so one thing I'll mention that's in, I think it's in statute, might be in regulation, is if you want to know what loss of use covers, one thing an insurer is obliged to give you by law is a list of what that does cover. So ask your insurer, what do you mean by loss of use? So they should be giving you a list of items that are basically anything that is an additional expense that is incurred because of the fact that you are no longer in your home, right? So it's additional meal costs, it's additional gasoline costs for commute, or it's additional babysitting cost if that's part of the change in your life that has occurred as a part of this fire. The most common piece, of course, of additional living expense is that you need to live somewhere else, so that's an obvious one. But ask your insurer to give you their list, and then if there's something else that is an expense you didn't have before this happened, and now you have to incur in order to maintain your previous daily existence as best you can, then bring that up as an additional living expense.
Yeah, I've had people do things like boarding their dog because their rental wouldn't allow them to have their pets, right? And so they had to board their pets, things of that nature, additional examples.
Oh, right. And on the other piece, the garage, or?
And so the question was, underinsurance, garage not covered.
Okay, typically if it's a homeowner's policy, there would be a percentage of coverage for other structures. And that pretty much, if you have a separate garage isn't part of your single residence structure, that's where you would get your coverage for not only the garage, but decks and patios and pools. Many insurers offer additional coverage for other structures if you need higher limits than that 10%. You might ask the insurer or mention to the insurer or agent that nobody ever mentioned that there was additional coverage available to me, because some people, particularly in rural areas, have barns or any kind of additional structures on the lot that may be of some value. So you might bring that up, but generally the only limit you have is the percentage of other structures coverage that's in your homeowner's policy.
Here we go. Is it possible to get funds over policy limit to replace your home when prices are higher and cheaper to buy?
Yeah, so again, what you're going to get from your policy is limited to your policy limits, which includes all those additional coverages. and how much of those policy limits it takes to rebuild the home you had. So it isn't really a consideration of the cost of a home somewhere else or the one you want to buy in terms of how much you are going to have available to you. It's based on that reconstruction value of the house that burned.
On that same card, the person wrote, we have a clause on our policy for 150% of policy to rebuild or replace. So that's probably your extended replacement endorsement that Joel was speaking about earlier. So
Right.
you want to make sure you clarify, what are the endorsements and extras that you've paid for? An extended replacement endorsement, sometimes it's 150%, sometimes you could see it any of a variety of percentages. So you want to go through that policy and do the math. If you're having trouble doing the math because you're just like, hey, this looks like a bunch of legalese, ask your adjuster, what am I entitled to? And if you want to double check, you can call the Department of Insurance and get some help to figure that out. If you feel like it's, you know, you're worried about what the adjuster has told you vis-a-vis what's in your policy. All right. I think this is, how does the inflation, I think that's an inflation factor work. Very similar. That's another endorsement. It's an extra that you paid for in your policy. So it's usually tied to the inflation rate. And again, so you go on to calculate that out. You could have an inflation protection endorsement. You might have an extended replacement endorsement. All of these start adding up to, you know, extra policy benefits you have. So again, you want to make sure you've gone through that policy with a fine-tooth comb. Have you found all the buckets of money? Do you know what I'm saying? That you're entitled to, all the extras that you paid for. So again, that's an extra, an endorsement that you paid for. So you want to calculate that out.
Yeah, typically the company will increase your renewal, right, your limits by an inflation factor, but then from the point of the effective date of your most recent policy until your date of loss, there's also been some inflation. So you'll want them to add that into the calculation, right? 6 months have passed into my policy. So if a 4% inflation factor that's applied, 2% would have accrued in the 6 months before the date of loss.
All right, here we go, another question. What's a reasonable amount of time to receive an estimate for rebuilding?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and it is one of the biggest issues that people have. There have been a lot of delays after some of these catastrophic events in insurers getting out with an estimate of replacement cost. Some have come out with different variations of that. I think many just kind of do a valuation to give you kind of an ACV, actual cash value amount, and then sometimes even ask the consumer to come up with the replacement cost to get the rest. I don't know, I don't have the specific answer of what's reasonable to get that scope of loss. It's within a few months is all I would say, but I don't have a time frame.
And I would also just encourage you using that paper trail strategy that we talked about earlier. You know, keep track of it with your insurer and just say, well, listen, I'm still waiting to get that estimate of the cost to rebuild that you've said that you would provide. Can you let me know when you anticipate that being provided? And will this be extending any timelines that, you know, that we have otherwise in the policy this time that I have to wait if it ends up being some sort of unreasonable amount of time? So ask them that, put that in writing. Here's one. Is it a good idea to get an independent audit of your policy? I'm not 100% sure what you mean by independent audit, but if you mean by having like it's somebody, like an independent third party, take a look. I don't know if this would be independent, but somebody like maybe a public adjuster. I mean, there are, was that your question, sir?
Yeah, when I was going to Paradise, I saw a sign there and it said, we will do an independent audit of your policy.
Okay.
What it means to me is, hey, does my insurance company pay me what my policy says they're supposed to pay me?
I don't know this for certain, but I would venture a guess that that was probably an advertisement for a public adjuster. And again, I've had many policyholders over the years just say, hey, listen, they offer like a free consultation. I'm going to use that as an opportunity to learn And who knows, maybe I'm so impressed by what they're able to tell me, I end up entertaining the idea of hiring them. But even if I don't, maybe that's a good opportunity to learn more myself. So again, if you see those advertisements, again, I think with everything, just, take it all in. Don't feel, if you do go into something like that, don't feel pressured. Sometimes when you get into a situation like that, you might feel pressured, but again, having somebody take a look at it, I don't say it is a bad idea, but with that caveat.
It's hard for us that don't deal with insurance policies all the time to know if the insurance company has paid us what the policy says they're supposed to pay us, because there's so many legalese in it.
You know what, your point is so well taken. I remember going through this myself and feeling that same way. Just like there's so many bits and pieces. It's like multiple mini claims within one, right? You got your dwelling claim, you got your structure claim, got your AOE claim. There's these different buckets of money. We have these different endorsements. So again, if you want to check in with a professional, again, public adjuster is a professional. Many of them will offer, like you said, that free consultation. I would just say, before you consider any professional, just check licensing. Do you know what I'm saying? Check licensing and really try to avoid being pressured. I would be very wary of anybody who's trying to pressure you right now. Anybody who's trying to pressure you to put your name on a contract, and do you know what I'm saying? Kind of like a high intensity sales pitch. That would be a red flag. But that being said, there are many wonderful public adjusters who really help a lot of people navigate this process. As we were talking about earlier in professional help, it's a tool in the tool belt, and it's an important tool. So again, if there's a particular one or various ones that offer free consultations, that's again a source of information for you. But again, check licensing. I mean, would I even go to a consultation with somebody who wasn't licensed by the state of California, Department of Insurance? No. You know what I'm saying? Other things to think about if you get in there and you're thinking about hiring a professional public adjuster, check licensing, check references, ask for references and call on them. Also, I would ask, hey, are you a member of NAPIA or CAPIA? That is the professional trade organizations for that industry. National Association of Public Insurance Adjusters is the national branch. California Association of Public Insurance Adjusters. I'm not saying that's an end-all, be-all, but those are data points that could be useful for you. Do you know what I'm saying? So check licensing, ask for references, check them, and checking references is something you can hand off to somebody who has offered to give you a hand. If you're like, oh my gosh, I'm already overwhelmed, I don't have time to do all this due diligence. Hey, like you said, hopefully you have friends and family who've offered to give you some assistance. Hand that task off to them. Hey, can you call on these 5 references and tell me what you hear back? So again, can be a useful resource. So again, definitely an option.
Yeah, and I would just add, ask them, well, what additional coverages, what are examples of additional coverages that you might be able to identify that are other than the ones that, I'm aware of for the home and the contents and the ALE and the other structures? Like, what are you referring to right?
The big question I have is on ID and is it OL? The two, one of them is ID, option ID and option OL. How much of that are they supposed to pay you? I mean, you have like 20% coverage. Do they have to pay you the 20? And on the OL, you got 10%. Do they have to pay you the full 10%? That's the question I have that I can't.
OL.
O&P, overhead and profit?
What was the coverage? OL?
OL is it option ID and option OL. One is for increased code costs, and the other one is for code updates.
Okay, so
Sounds
building
like
code
code
upgrade is what I've been referring to earlier, and I would say almost everyone is going to have a building code upgrade expense, and generally building code upgrade is a coverage that shows up when an insurer provides it. It typically shows up on your deck page, either as building code upgrade or increased cost of construction or something along those lines. And I would say, one of the reasons that United Policyholders puts up the signs for you to get together with people who have coverage from the same insurer you do is that you can learn from each other about these other coverages that you have discovered along the way without incurring a cost. But generally, everybody here will have an a code upgrade cost when they rebuild, because codes are constantly changing, and one big one was the requirement for sprinkler systems in new construction. That is, I think, a statewide requirement. So you're going to have that. So everybody will have a cost. Whether you have the coverage or not depends on your policy form.
I've heard from some of my friends that the insurance company that they had paid them the total amount that they had available for upgrade.
Yes.
But it's my understanding they don't have to do that. Is that correct?
Well, yes, they do have to do that. If you have the coverage and you do rebuild or you replace, then, and you incur the cost, that much of cost to replace. So if you have your policy limit, your code upgrade, and your extended replacement cost, and it takes all of those coverages together to rebuild your home. It takes the max of all those coverages, maybe more, to rebuild your home, then the insurer owes you that amount, whether you rebuild the home or you buy elsewhere. So they have to pay it.
You don't replace or rebuild, they don't have to pay you.
Correct. Then they pay you the actual cash value of your home, and you are walking away from the difference between actual cash value and replacement cost.
Remember that insurance policies are contracts of indemnity, right? Which means that if you incur the cost, they're going to cover it. But typically, you have to incur it. But of course, the practicalities of large losses like this, and you guys saw these with the initial down payments on some of the coverages. Most people can't out of pocket this stuff right off the bat. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's why they will often forward particular amounts of the coverage. You get your ACV, your actual cash value payment on your structure to help you get started, right? But as a general proposition, if you don't incur it, do you know what I'm saying? You don't get it, right? As a general proposition. We have, okay, which supersedes, state law or their policy? State law, yeah.
State law.
State law,
Right.
State law. All right. Should we renew our homeowner's policy after loss?
Yeah, you may be hearing, that people in some wildfire areas are having a hard time getting coverage. And for that reason, we would recommend that you renew. The insurer is obliged to renew your policy if you've had a total loss in a catastrophe. So if you've had a total loss, they have to renew your policy at least once. I'm not sure if that law is changing, but I don't remember if it's current. So there's at least one renewal. What you want to do, so you want to protect the fact that you have a coverage and take the opportunity to keep the one you have, because it may be difficult in the future to find coverage in an array of insurers or other insurers. You can replace it elsewhere if you choose, but you do have that one renewal obligation or from the insurer. They're obliged to renew. You should talk to them about the limit of your policy, because obviously if you've had a total loss, you don't have a structure there, and you don't want to pay for a $400,000 limit. Most insurers have some kind of minimum limit for a homeowner's policy. That's kind of their base price, and you might want to renew or even midterm, if you're in mid-policy year, lower your limit to what their minimum is, and just make sure that you increase those limits as your property value accumulates on your home as it gets rebuilt, right? So maybe they have a $100,000 minimum to write a homeowner's policy, so you want to lower your limit to that if there's no home on the property. No reason to pay for a $400,000 limit on the policy.
Does that requirement for them to renew for 1 year apply to non-standard or non-admitted policies as well as a number of people were insured.
It doesn't apply to surplus lines companies, if that's what
Yeah,
you're...
yeah.
No, it's to admitted insurers, is my understanding. And you can call us to, I can make mistakes. I probably made several tonight, so keep that in mind. But call us up and ask, but I don't think that rule applies to non-admitted companies.
All right, you guys, I think we're going to take one or two more questions, but then Joel and I'm not going anywhere, are you? And I'm going to because I want to make sure that we leave time to send you to these insurance interest group breakout sessions. So let me take, because a lot of these are repeats of ones that we've already heard, and it's because they're excellent questions, wonderful questions you've had here this evening. So we'll just take one or two more, and I'm going to send you to your breakout sessions, but we will be here just one-on-one, so we're not going anywhere. This being a rural area, what is the best way to locate a certified industrial hygienist? This is a partial loss. So what's the best way? Is there an association, where, trade organization? What's the best way to find a certified hygienist? I would say, first of all, try to network with other partial loss survivors, right? So network with other partial loss survivors. Have they been able to locate anybody? Who have they used? I was a total loss, but I ended up doing an independent scope of loss on my home as part of my negotiating strategy. How did I find them? I'm not kidding you guys. I was literally at a meeting like this, and somebody raised their hand in the back. They're like, hey, I use this company. They need the company to do my scope of loss. I just want to put that out there for everybody. I literally wrote a note down, and that's who I ended up using. So I think one of the best ways you can do it is by networking amongst yourselves with other partial loss survivors. I would say, hey, listen, internet research, also maybe talk with some of these, maybe give a public adjuster a call and just say, hey, I'm not interested in hiring a public adjuster, but can you give me a lead on who you use as a certified hygienist? They may or may not be willing to hand out that information, but why not call and just say, hey, listen, do you have any leads? Can I check those out? And just remember, as with any other professional that you hire, right? Check licensing, whether it's a partial loss or total loss. Check licensing, ask for references, and check them, right? And be wary of anybody who's trying to rush you, right? Rush you to sign on the dotted line, all right?
There may be some resources on the United Policyholders website
Under
for
the
that
Find
one,
Help
because it's
section.
come up at prior meetings.
We have to hold that so I can turn these. All right. All right, and I think we'll end with this one. What is the best way to access potential grant or donation money? All right. So again, Maitreya, is the local assistance center still open?
No, this is the SBA.
Okay.
That's at St. John's Church on Floral Avenue.
All right, then I would, as a former fire survivor myself, again, I would rely on my fire survivor community to help me locate those, but also coming to meetings like this. When you go to your insurance breakout sessions, ask people, have you heard, are there any other sources of money? If the SBA is still open, pop in there and just say like, hey, are you aware of any other free sources of donations of grants? Anytime you come across anybody who is engaged in helping fuel the recovery here, have they heard of anything? You could also try calling local charities and local churches. Hey, I am a campfire survivor and I'm just trying to accumulate a list of places that are providing donations and grants. Are you aware of any, right? So your fire survivor community, go by the SBA office, ask them if they're familiar. Check in with charities, other charities and religious organizations. FEMA would also be a good one. Call their 800 number. Are you aware of anybody still providing donations and grants to this particular disaster? All right, you guys, we have about 15 minutes left. So what we're going to do right now is, first of all, I'm going to provide you one last reminder to please partake in the UP survey online. Thank you again. That really does help UP help you in terms of gathering information and leverage. Around the room, we see that we have got Farmers in the back, USAA in the back, Allstate in the back, AAA in the corner, Safeco here. If you don't see your name up, go to the other, State Farm to the left, and Nationwide. This is a great opportunity to network with people insured by your same insurance company. Thank you so much, and we certainly hope this evening has been helpful for you.